영상의 구성은 다음과 같습니다. 그럼 한번 시작해 볼까요?
Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for? Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for? Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for? Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for? Here's a sentence from the video that brings up an expression that I would say is a really common one in English, and that's the expression weak spot. So here's the whole sentence. Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for? Right? So will you read that for me?
Yeah, sure. Can you give me an example of something that might be a weak spot you could prepare for?
Yeah, good job. Great pronunciation on all of that. Have you heard the term weak spot before?
I think I have, but I think you remember you taught me a sweet spot before.
Yes. Oh,
Yes.
good one. Yeah, sweet spot. So sweet spot is like, the perfect place.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, maybe now's a good time to show you the definition. A weak spot is a vulnerable place or an area of weakness.
Okay, so they are not like antonyms or anything like that. They're not opposite.
I wouldn't say they are. I would say they're very similar and they might be close to antonyms, meaning opposites of each other. But I wouldn't want to say that they are exact antonyms. That would be a good question I can look up for and let you know back on.
Alrighty.
Okay. So another sentence using weak spot. His weak spot when he played chess was that he didn't think enough about his future moves. Have you ever played chess before?
I think I have, yeah, but it's really hard, and then it takes a really long time for me to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just,
Yeah.
it's not
Well,
my favorite.
It's not my favorite game either, but you have to think not only about the move you're gonna make, but you have to think about like, okay, well, if I do this, the other person, and then how it, what are all the other moves that will be made? So in this example, the weak spot for this chess player was that maybe he moved too rapidly and he didn't think about, what might happen later on with those moves. So that was his weak spot, was not thinking enough about the moves.
Apparently, he's not a good chess player then.
I would say that is probably true because I think in order to be a really good chess player, you have to think far ahead.
Yes.
And like to a point of really hard to do.
Exactly.
Right. So how about that sentence? Will you read that one?
Yeah, sure. His weak spot when he played chess was that he didn't think enough about his future moves.
Yeah, very good. Great pronunciation and emphasis on the right syllables and even within the sentence. So what do you think is what's a weak spot for, like, what if you were in a job interview? Do you have a weak spot that you wouldn't want someone to ask you about?
Oh, in terms of job interview?
Yeah, like you're sitting in a job interview, answering their questions, and you don't know what questions they're going to ask, but what is something that, you might feel like, oh, please don't ask about whatever it is, because that's my weak spot.
Probably like my introduction. I don't know. I really, every time I know they're going to ask me about, who I am, what kind of candidate I am, but it's really hard for me to, like to be distinctive, from other candidates. I don't know.
Yeah, so that you stand out.
Yeah, to stand out.
Yeah. Like a weak spot for me is I'm kind of I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so, if they were to ask me, how quickly can you complete a task? Ooh, that would be a weak spot for me because I spend so long doing things and making sure it's exactly right that I know I produce good results, but it may take me longer than the next person.
Gotcha.
So for me, that would be a weak spot, right? So want to try a sentence of your own using weak spot?
Yeah. So when I go to a buffet, I become out of control. That's my weak spot.
Okay. Yep. And if we make it more fun, I would say coffee is one of my weak spots. Right?
Not sweet spot?
No, not. No. Nope.
Okay.
That's not the use of sweet spot. So,
Gotcha.
and before we end on this one, here's some synonyms. Technically, your weak spot means your weakness or something that is you're vulnerable. So in many cases, a weak spot could be thought of as like a flaw or a shortcoming or a limitation. So it's most often used in reference to not being a great quality you would want to have, perhaps, or something that you're susceptible to.
A quick question. Is the word shortcoming commonly used here in the United
I think
States?
it is.
Okay.
I think it is, yeah.
The reason why I'm asking is because when I had an interview for a previous position, actually, they used this word to ask a question. Yeah, so I didn't even know the meaning of the word. So I ended up asking them multiple times, to repeat their questions and the meaning. So I was really super embarrassed.
Yeah. And I take it that the interview was in English.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. In English.
And maybe a technique around that for any listeners, if you're asked a word, you're not sure of the meaning, instead of saying, in the first place, I think there's nothing wrong with saying, could you please define that word for me? I'm not familiar with it. Because I think that's just you admitting that, oh, wait, you're not perfect. But another way around that, if you're not comfortable with that version, is to say, could you please tell me how you're using that word in this situation?
Oh, that's a really good one.
Right? So you're not admitting you don't know what it is. You might, they might think, the word, you're just not sure how it's being applied in this situation or circumstance.
That's a really good tip. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. I'm here to help.